Welcome to episode 5 of Let's Talk Breweriana. I have to tell you, I am so excited about today's episode. We're going to be covering Lucky Lager. I was lucky enough myself to be able to go to Vancouver, Washington and see Patrick Franco and Tyler Castle speak at Lucky Lager Untapped. It was such an incredible talk. Not only was it an informative presentation, but it was engaging. There was so much laughter in the crowd from shared memories of the town. I've attached the video in the description so you can watch the full presentation if you'd like. Not only that, Patrick and Tyler are going to be having some of their collection up in a local museum for others to enjoy. So if you do find yourself in the Vancouver area, be sure and stop by. Now, my guest today is known for his knowledge, his fabulous honey holes, and his ability to buy and sell. Without further ado, please welcome Patrick Franco. He's going to start by telling us how he got started with collecting.
I've been collecting since 1979. So I was a teenager, probably like 16. And my dad was collecting beer cans. And at some point I thought, this is really cool, but I want to start collecting signs. So as soon as I was old enough to take the bus to the flea market, I started buying beer signs. And then, we were in the Bay Area. I lived in Santa Clara, which is Northern California. So we had a lot of breweries in the area that had closed. And so there was a lot of stuff to find. And that's how I got started. And then a friend of my dad's worked for Lucky Lager, this older guy, and he had met my dad and they started exchanging stuff. And so I kind of got into Lucky and I thought it's kind of cool. So I asked my dad, I said, how come there's not any Lucky signs? And he said to me, well, there are. You just have to go find them. They sold a lot of beer. They're a big company, so they must have signs. And then it was like, okay, let me start looking for Lucky signs. And then after I found one, then there was two, and then there was three. And then I met another guy that lived in San Francisco, the same age as me. We had the same interests, and he lived across the street from the old Lucky Brewery. So long story short, we became really competitive and the fires were going. And for 20 years, we were fighting for every sign that came along. And then eBay came along. And of course, there was a lot more signs to buy. And then in 1998, I moved from the Bay Area to Portland, Oregon. And I quickly realized that I knew that Lucky had a brewery in Vancouver, Washington, which is just across the river from Portland. And I realized that the stuff they made for that brewery was not the same as the stuff for California. So now I started collecting Lucky stuff from Vancouver, Washington, which is completely different in design and the graphics and stuff are really different, really cool. So then I amassed a pretty good collection of Vancouver stuff. And I never thought in my wildest dreams I'd end up living actually Vancouver, Washington. So now I literally live 2 miles away from where the brewery was. And it's like my collection is so fitting to be in Vancouver. And the people in this community that have visited my house and seen my collection realize that, God, this stuff is really cool. And it's so Vancouver. But a lot of people from Washington don't realize that the brewery's history is from San Francisco. So I'm really grateful that I started collecting it and built a pretty good collection and you couldn't do it today. It would take you 40 years to do what I did. So I'm happy with the results.
That's really cool. What was your first sign that you actually were able to collect?
A Lucky sign or
any sign?
So like I said, when I was 16 years old, I had a driver's license, but I didn't have a car. And my buddy and I would go to the San Jose flea market. And literally, we'd have $20 or $30 in our pocket. And in those days, you could come home with two signs with $20 or $30 in your pocket. So my very first sign was this Falstaff sign, which was from San Jose. And I kind of started collecting Falstaff too, because it's a local brewery that I remembered. And so the sign is like a shield that lights up, Falstaff sign. And I paid $12 for it.
Now that you brought it up, what was your first Lucky sign?
I actually have my first Lucky. So my dad bought this at one of the shows. It's over there. I'll show you what it is later. It's like this wooden sign, and they come around every now and again. So it's not super rare, but I have a very clean one that we've had since 1980. So I've had it a long, long time, and it's another one that's been in the collection since the beginning.
That's incredible.
Of course, I inherited all my dad's Lucky beer cans. When I moved to Oregon, I confiscated all the Lucky stuff in the house, which he wasn't too happy about it, but what I can tell you is when I was a teenager and growing up and buying all this stuff, and my mom was like, "You got too much stuff," and my dad's like, "You have so many Lucky signs," and it was like, "You need to collect something else too. It's not just all Lucky." So then when I left and took all my stuff, he was like, "You're taking all that stuff?" Yep. So I took all the Lucky stuff.
That's so funny. That's a good story. Full circle moment. What a great way to start collecting. Now, if you're watching the video version, you got to see some of Patrick's collection while we were talking. If you're watching the audio only, I suggest heading over to our Facebook or our website, and you too can experience the full effect of getting to see the collection. Next, Patrick is going to take us through some history of Lucky Lager. He's going to be starting in 1933. Take it away, Pat.
Lucky Lager was introduced. The company was started by the grandson of Anheuser-Busch. He had two granddaughters, and he gave both of their husbands money to start breweries. So one of them started Lone Star in San Antonio, Texas, and the other started Lucky in San Francisco. So it was a brand new turnkey facility, and they built the brewery like from the bottom up, brand new. It was like one of the first breweries after Prohibition that was a company that wasn't in business before Prohibition. So they were in a big risk. But they got a brewmaster from Germany. They had top-notch technicians, and they wanted to be like the purest, best, finest beer in the world. And they did a really nice job because they started out really good. Also, part of the history is at the same time, there's the Coast Breweries of Vancouver, BC, which is also known as the Westminster, BC Brewery. They, along with Lucky, put money together to start the brewery. So they were all connected from the very beginning with Canada until 1958 when they broke off. So for a long time, Lucky Canada and Lucky California were together. Lucky did so well, like they double their sales every year, double, triple their sales every year for the first 10 years. And then by like 1950, they were the number one brewer in the West in 13 states. And so they were expanding in 1950. Well, actually, I'll back up a little bit. So the Vancouver, Washington had a brewery called the Star Brewery, which was also affiliated with the Coast Breweries in Vancouver. So Vancouver, BC actually helped the Star Brewery get started. The Star Brewery, though, was in business before Prohibition in Vancouver, Washington. So Lucky, when Lucky got involved with them through Canada in 1939, they started making Lucky Lager in Vancouver, Washington. Well, they didn't buy the brewery, but it was a contract deal, so they contracted the Interstate Brewery to brew Lucky Lager. So in 1939, when the Star Brewing Company affiliated with Lucky, they changed the name from Star Brewing to Interstate. And Lucky was so popular that their host brand was Hop Gold beer. So Hop Gold beer was a beer from Vancouver, Washington. That's very popular before Prohibition. Dates back to like Henry Weinhardt's owned the brewery. And so they went out of business. And after Prohibition, they came back. So people remembered it. It was a local product. But when they started selling Lucky Lager, it was so prolific that they stopped making Hop Gold like in 1941. So around World War II, they stopped making Hop Gold, and Lucky was super popular in Washington. And then, like I said, by 1950, Lucky was the number one beer in the West. So in 1949, they actually bought the Hop Gold Brewery, the Interstate Brewery. So the Vancouver Brewery became part of their family. And then, right shortly after that, after World War II, everyone was moving to Los Angeles. Everyone wanted to be a movie star. They wanted to go to Hollywood. So LA's population boomed. So Lucky put a plant in Azusa, California, which is in the east side of LA. And they opened a brewery there in 1949. So now they had three breweries. They had San Francisco, Vancouver, and Los Angeles. And they continued to really thrive. And then towards the end of the 50s, they bought the Fisher Brewing Company in Salt Lake City, which was around 1957, because they were expanding into more states. They wanted to sell beer in Texas and Colorado and New Mexico. So they bought the Fisher Brewery in Salt Lake City. And their idea was to really dominate the Southwest. But it didn't work out. That brewery only lasted till like 1966 or 67. So Lucky didn't do well in that area.
Is there a reason that Lucky didn't do well in that area?
I think like in the South, like Coors got really big in Texas and Arizona and California. And I think Coors really hurt Lucky's sales in those areas. So I think they pulled out of Salt Lake City. And so Lucky's run was very strong until about 1962. Then they started to decline. And what happened was all the kids went to Vietnam, and when they came back, they wanted Olympia and Coors. They didn't want Lucky. Their dads or grandpas all drank Lucky, but they're like, no, we want Coors, we want Olympia. So that really killed the market for Lucky in Southern California. So they were really hurting. So they sold their California brewery in LA to Miller. So not only did they have competition because Pabst and Schlitz and Budweiser all came to LA like in 1950, 51, 52. And then here in 1966, Lucky decides to sell their brewery to Miller. So now they have even more competition. So that was kind of the beginning of the end for Lucky. They really declined after that.
That makes sense. How long was Vancouver open?
So the Vancouver brewery actually was the longest running Lucky brewery in the chain. The San Francisco brewery closed in. So Salt Lake City closed in 67. The Zusa one 68, 66, 68 around there. And then the San Francisco brewery, which was their biggest brewery and their flagship brewery, closed in 1978. And then in 1978, the only brewery left was Vancouver. So they remained in business till 1985. And after 1985, by then Pabst and Lucky and Hams and Ole, they're all one company by then. So the Olympia Brewery in Tacoma, Tumwater, Washington, took on the production of Lucky, and they lasted till about I want to say like 1999. So that's the last Lucky was in like probably around 1999, and it's not brewed anywhere in the U.S. anymore.
That's so interesting. Is it brewed anywhere anymore?
Interesting enough, the Coast Breweries in Vancouver, BC, has made Lucky since 1934, and they got taken over by Labatt's like in the 50s. So Labatt's owns the Lucky brand, and they still produce it in Western Canada. It's only made at the Edmonton Brewery of Labatt's, and the beer is only sold in the British Columbia province. You can't buy it anywhere else. It's like mainly Victoria and Vancouver, Canada is their market, and the people that live there love that beer. And it's like it's the local favorite, and they don't ship it to the U.S. You have to go there to buy it, and it's actually really good beer. It's a good product, and it's lasted. It's still going strong.
That's so interesting. Is there a favorite Lucky story that you have from when they were kind of in their heyday? Whether it be like pop culture or expanding or anything like that.
Um, I don't know. I guess one of the weird things they did in the 60s, they started like really going downhill. So they tried different things, and they came up with a beer called King Snedley's beer, and it came about by a advertising class from the University of California, Cal State Hayward, which is in the East Bay. So they put these kids to work, and they came up with this whole scheme to sell this beer. And they created an entire environment like it was like the royal family. They had to do like the king and the queen and the prince, and they put so much energy and work into it. But the cans are like silver and black, and they not very appealing. And they thought, well, this is like the new age of Lucky, so they're trying to get young people to drink it, and it totally flopped. So soon after that, they sold out, and then they changed their whole entire label. They got rid of the X. They came out with like Lucky Malt Liquor, Lucky Draft, Lucky Light, Lucky Extra Light. I mean, they went crazy with all these new fad beers, which it's funny because today you have Michelob Ultra, you have Miller Genuine Draft, you have all these malt liquors, King Cobra and Miller Malt Liquor, Magnum, all these different beers came out, and Lucky like started all that. They had all that stuff. They had like light beer before Miller Light, and they were kind of trend setting, but they didn't make it. So it's kind of weird that they had all these great ideas.
That is really interesting. One of the things that I found so interesting in your talk with Tyler Castle when you did it was the age dated. So, can you kind of take us through a little bit about what that is and how that changed throughout the history?
So one of the things that was something we brought up in our talk at our Vancouver show that Budweiser came out with Born on Dating in, I believe, 1993. They were bragging about, hey, every can of Budweiser is dated. It's for freshness. We date the can every day, the day it's packaged, and it's the coolest thing. Well, Lucky started that in 1933. The history of that is Lucky, when it first came out, after Prohibition, some of the breweries had to like talk people into trying their beer. So people are like, is it really got enough alcohol in it? Is it near beer? Is it real beer? So some of the breweries call their beer real beer. Well, Lucky did a different thing. They insured their beer. Their beer ad said that it was bonded by an insurance policy that guaranteed it was real beer. So in the beginning, it was called Lucky Bonded Beer, and then through the generations, the X on the can and the bottles changed pretty pretty often, and through the chronological order. They originally said in the middle of the X it said bonded beer, and then they moved to dated beer in about 1937. All the cans said dated beer, and the ale bottles and cans said dated ale. And then about 1939, they changed to age dated beer, and that was the big thing. Is Lucky is age dated beer, right? So that lasted until the late 50s. They dated every can and every bottle with the date, and then in 1962, when they changed the label again to a more modern looking can with a smaller X. As time got on, the X was really big and prominent. That's their iconic logo. The big X was on the bottle. Then, as time went by through the 50s and 60s, the X got smaller and smaller. In 1962, the X got really small. They kind of had a rounded logo, and they stopped dating in 1962. And then in 1963 or 64, the flat top went to a zip top and then a pull top. And then you have what you have today, which is the pull top doesn't come off anymore, but that's kind of the changing of the guard. And the dating went away in 1962.
Interesting. Besides Hop Gold, was there a different product that they were known for, or they tried to bring back?
So two other items came out with Lucky Lager due to their link with Canada. Canada had Silver Springs beer, so they brought that to Vancouver. So Vancouver sold Silver Springs beer for about 10 years as like their secondary product to Hop Gold. And then they also brought the Canada brewery also introduced Banker's Ale, which is a product that kind of lingered at Lucky for a while. They had it in Vancouver, they had it in San Francisco in the 40s, and they had Lucky Ale at the time, but they came out with the Banker's Ale, was kind of like a more premium ale, English style ale, and that came from Canada, and that ended probably around 1943, and then again in 1958, Lucky brought Banker's Ale back again, only made in San Francisco, and they really pushed a really sharp looking green can, almost like a Rainier can. It kind of mimics Rainier Ale, so you can kind of see where they were going with it, but came out in 1958, and I read over the years some publications where they brought that beer out to compete in the African American market. For some reason, the black people like stronger beer, so I kind of think the Lucky Banker's Ale was kind of like malt liquor. And I did read that they didn't do that well. So by about 1960 or 61, they were pulling it off the shelves, and I was reading articles where there's still old beer in Oakland and Richmond and some of the neighborhoods where the beer is still in the coolers.
Thanks.
So it kind of lingered for a while, but it kind of died in 1961. And to my knowledge, they never tried to make ale again.
Oh, man.
So it was kind of a neat product and very little advertising for it. And I do have a Banker's Ale Neon, which is like one of my totally top 5 signs in my collection. It's one of a kind, and it's one of the signs that when people come over, they want to look at it. I'm like, I want to see that sign. And there's only one made because they made it. The brewery decided it was too expensive, so they only made one sign. And somehow, some way, it came to me. So I've had it for about 30 years.
That's so cool. Well, speaking of your collection, can we have a tour?
Sure.
Thanks so much for joining us for episode 5 of Let's Talk Breweriana. Special shout out to our guest Patrick Franco for taking the time to let us see his collection and hear his stories. If you were watching the audio only version, go ahead and head to our Facebook or our website and you can see the full effect of the videos and Patrick's collection. We will see you guys next time. Have a good one.